Well, I asked relatives because Grandma and Grandpa have passed away on both sides of the family. So both the Higo side and the Saraguchi side, which is my mom's side of the family, both came from Japan to the United States. And Dad's side, the Higo side, were in Seattle, Washington, is where they were housed. And then my mom's side of the family was in California. So Dad's side, his dad owned a hotel out in Seattle. Mom's side were farmers out in California. And so then when the war broke out, they rounded up the Japanese Americans on the West Coast because they were, dangerous. They might be spies. So Dad's side of the family ended up in internment camp in Arkansas, and Mom's side of the family ended up in an internment camp in Poston, Arizona. So that's where they went to internment camps, and the reasons why they came, the grandparents, they're the first generation called Issei's, and why they came to the United States to begin with, I tried to ask around to find out, and because there was a language barrier, my grandparents didn't speak English, they spoke Japanese, and their children, of course, grew up speaking English, but there was a language barrier, and so the reasons why they came to the United States somehow got lost. As my aunt said, she's 98 years old. My aunt is 98 years old, and I called her yesterday, and I said, "Do you know why Grandma and Grandpa came to the United States?" And she said, "No." She said, "There's a language barrier, and it's a mystery." And I go, "Okay, it's a mystery." But she did say that my grandfather, her father, was in Mexico first, and then went to California, and then married my grandmother. It was an arranged marriage, to my understanding. So that's, for whatever reason, he went from Mexico to California and then married my grandmother there. So, well, my parents were young adults. Well, my dad was a young adult. My mom was actually still in high school at the time that they were put in internment camp. She went to high school in the internment camp in Poston, Arizona. I have a yearbook of that. So they had like a life in the camps. I mean, they had recreational activities and schools for the kids. And so my mom used to talk about all the dust that they had. She says everywhere there was dust, and my aunt says that when they went to the internment camp, she can remember being put on buses, and they blocked all the windows so that they couldn't see out and no one could see in. And when you're a younger person, it was at first an adventure. My aunt says it was kind of an adventure at first until they got there, and then they saw the conditions, and there was no privacy in the camps at all. I mean, if you've seen some of the documentaries, some of them are barracks, sometimes they stayed in horse stalls. My parents didn't talk about being in horse stalls where they were located, but there were barracks. And typically, they just had like curtains between the families so that there wasn't much privacy. Each family had their own little area, and then they would go and have a communal kind of meals where they in the barracks. If you were like my dad was a little bit older, so because of that, apparently the young men got their own barracks. So they didn't have to stay with the families if they didn't want to. But they do talk about the conditions not being very hospitable, and having to use community places for bathing and toiletry and all of that. So it wasn't the most pleasant experience, but they did try to make it as much of a home as they could. And like I said, they had clubs and they had activities so that they weren't just sitting around. But no question about it, there were barbed wires around the camps, and there were lookout posts for guards and that kind of thing. So it wasn't, you knew you didn't have any freedoms. That was for sure. And I can't recall how old I was when I realized it was because they were Japanese Americans. and they were rounded up for, the safety of the United States, so-called safety of the United States. So I don't know exactly how old I was. Maybe just before middle school. Maybe 6th or 7th grade when reality hits about what that meant and what that was about. Probably about 6th grade, 5th or 6th grade. Yeah, because I can remember about that time there was an essay contest in elementary school about what it means to be an American, and I can remember writing about how my parents and grandparents were internment camps, and it was nice to be an American where there wasn't any fences or barriers or anything like that. But of course, that's certainly a change of what was happening when my parents were growing up. There's Issei's first generation, Nisei second generation, Sansei third generation. I'm a Sansei third generation here in the United States, and it was the Sanseis, a little bit older than I. Of course, like with each grouping, there's a large range of ages. So it was typically the older Sanseis who really started to fight for reparations for the Japanese Americans and went to Congress. And of course, fortunately, there were some Japanese Americans in Congress at the time who also helped back up that kind of legislation. So it was during the Reagan administration that they actually did get reparations. All people who survived and were still alive got $20,000. I mean, it's a small amount when you imagine that everything was taken away from their businesses, all of their rights and everything. But if you were still alive and you were in camp at that time, they did pass legislation, and it was under President Reagan. I can remember there was a large kind of get-together and celebration. I don't know if celebration is the right word, but a way to apologize to them down in Washington, D.C., and I remember my parents going down there along with other people who were at camp to sort of get the "we're sorry," kind of apology that they got long after. But yes, there was reparations, but it didn't come easy, and it took a while for it to pass through Congress and a lot of lobbying on behalf of the Japanese Americans to get that done. So this is a wood carving, and I didn't find out that this was something that was done in camp. There was a exhibit in the Chicago museums that I went to for people who were in internment camps. And I saw one of these birds, carved birds, in a showcase, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've got one of these at home that my mother has. And so, and the description in the showcase, what they had, it talked about how people kept themselves busy and they took wood carvings and they made pins like this. So I asked my mom about this because she was still alive at the time. I said, I saw one of these in a museum. And she said, yes. I think it was a former boyfriend. She didn't say that, but she said a friend had given it to her. So I thought, wow. And there's a safety pin on the back, so you can see that it was something that was homemade. And so I've kept that, and it's like I thought of wearing it, and I thought, no, I don't want to take the chance that the pin might break off or it might get snagged on a coat, so I thought I'd just bring it to show that some of the things that they did in camp to make a life for themselves and keep themselves engaged and entertained so they weren't getting bored.